Some people still claim that religion is unscientific, yet modern scientific inquiry continues to result in conversions from atheism to belief in a divine creator. The great Father Robert Spitzer is here to tell us about scientists who became believers.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and it is my privilege to welcome Father Robert Spitzer to talk about scientists who became believers. Father Robert Spitzer, S.J., Ph.D., is the founder and president of the Spitzer Center for Visionary Leadership and co-founder and president of the Magis Center, a fantastic resource for homeschooling families that uses science and philosophy to prove the realities of God and the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. It's so wonderful. A scholar, teacher, and seasoned leader, Father Spitzer is preeminently a theologian and philosopher. His other fields of expertise, however, include management, science, finance, ethics, and physics. He's the author of many best-selling Catholic books and has long been a popular EWTN host and is currently appearing weekly with Doug Keck in Father Spitzer's Universe. You can write into that show, by the way, and get your questions answered. I have two links in the show notes, the Spitzer Center for Visionary Leadership and the Magis Center. Father Spitzer, it is just a bucket list kind of dream of mine to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's a real honor to be here with you too, Lisa.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm curious, what started all of this? You've been such a powerhouse in this intersection of faith and science. What awakened you to those important connections?
Well, it actually goes all the way back to my high school days when I needed some evidence for God. Because, you know, I did not go to a Catholic high school. I did go to a Catholic university, thank goodness, because if it had not been for that, I'm not sure that I'd have the Roman collar on me right now, but I desperately wanted some evidence for God, and I was kind of looking around, and my priests at the parish were the best guys in the world, but didn't know anything about that subject. And then I also, you know, my dear mother was a wonderful person and a daily communicant Catholic, but she didn't much care about proofs and things like that. She basically say, well, you just hold a baby and, you know, then you'll know right away it's a miracle and therefore God exists. And I sort of was holding the baby and I just said, Mom, is not doing it for me. So, basically I really was in a search mode, and I was very lucky in my early years of college. One fellow who was a science person let me know about the singularity equations and the relevance that might have for the beginning of the universe from the vantage point of physics, these singularity equations. And so that I couldn't believe, wow.
Wow.
This is something of a real, a substance, a scientific substance. So I was very impressed with that. And then truly I was kind of walking down a corridor and at good old Gonzaga University, and as I was zooming past a classroom, I heard a professor saying proofs for the existence of God. I stopped there in the corner. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I slipped into the classroom. I literally looked back at the class. I said, I got to listen to this guy. So I'm listening away. I mean, it's pure Holy Spirit, obviously. I mean, the timing was so perfect. But anyway, the long and short of it is, I'm listening to this guy, and I finally, at the end of the class, I come up and I go, I don't think he can prove the existence of God. He goes, oh, yes, I can. And I said, well, finish up the proof. And he goes, oh, I know very well you're not in this class. He says, And I thought, thought I got away with it. But anyway, the long and short of it is that I did, he told me, you come back and take the whole class and I'll do it for you. So I did. I took this whole metaphysics class. I was so interested, and I was interested in a lot more. And that metaphysics class was a real turn on for me. So anyway, that got me started. And then, after that, I was interested both in, kind of philosophical proofs of God, logical proofs of God, as well as, in the scientific evidence for God. And so it was wonderful. I mean, the two things came together, and as they did, I began to hear about, this goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas. Who? Because I didn't go to a Catholic school, so I didn't, even know there were proofs from St. Thomas, and then I didn't even know there were modern renditions of those proofs. I knew the proof, that we learned in our metaphysics class, and I knew that it came from Thomas Aquinas. But then I began to actually study these things in earnest. Then I saw some, contemporary proofs for God's existence, which I found very, very persuasive. And so, as I say, the car got put into gear. And one day I was passing a Jesuit by in the field. He was my professor in literature and poetry, and but he was just a very bright man, Father Dave Lee, and he just said, "Oh, you're going to go to those Lonergan lectures?" And I said, Lonergan, who? And he goes, a very famous philosopher, Bernard Lonergan. I said, well, I wasn't planning on going. When are they going to be? He said, oh, they're tonight through whatever it was, Friday night. So I said, wow. And so I said, you got any recommendations of a book he wrote? And he goes, yeah, Insight, A Theory of Human Understanding. So I pick up that book, and of course I page through the table of contents, chapter 19, the affirmation of God, the proof for God's existence. So of course I got very interested there, a very contemporary person and, brilliant guy. The lecture was on the functional specialties, but I got keyed into this real genius who, is a philosophical genius but very well acquainted with physics and science. And the book is full of it. Insight is full of it, the physics. And so that just started the whole thing. And as I say, the rest is history. I really, when I did my PhD work, I very much wanted, to do something at the intersection of philosophy and science. And of course, time theory was that. And so I decided to do really a dissertation on the ontology of real time. And once that dissertation was done, I felt, right at, between relativity theory and, what is time that undergirds, relativity theory, but not just relativity theory, but simple things like, Queen Elizabeth, alive and Queen Elizabeth dead. You're going to have some non-contemporaneous continuum that separates those two moments. Otherwise, Queen Elizabeth would be alive and dead at the same time. And that, of course, cannot be. That's a contradiction. So I thought, well, there has to be some non-contemporaneous separation. Time must, in some sense, be real. And just looking at how would you hold real time together. And I became a real fan of Bergson, Henri Bergson, who postulated that the only way you can have a non-contemporaneous continuum where earlier is held together with later, such that you could have a real present moment that had temporal duration in it, maybe even 10 to the minus 42nd seconds, which is the Planck interval, that would have to be done by some kind of mind or elementary consciousness, he called it, or elementary memory, he called it in another book. But the point was, without that kind of transcendental mentative, dimension that could hold together the earlier and the later, you couldn't have time. But what is a transcendent dimension that can hold all of time together, in the non-contemporaneous continuum? Well, well, gee, that would be God. And, I didn't lose the implications there. So I was very much, I saw, gosh, this is a dimension that nobody knows about, yet it is so persuasive. And then, like I said, I started teaching. We have in the Jesuits, we have a time called Regency when you actually do student teaching. I did my student teaching at Seattle University, and I could tell right away, they needed this evidence for God from physics, this evidence for God from philosophy. They needed to bring together the philosophical and the scientific dimensions. And so, my classes were always oversold, always. Not because of me, because of the topic. Everybody wanted to know. And so by the time, I became president of Gonzaga, I kept teaching this course. And you could get easily 100 kids in a course where you'd actually have to get some, I had to get 3 of my late professor colleagues to teach seminars, because I didn't want to turn anybody away from the course, So anyway, that's, to make a long story short, that's how it all kind of came, up. And I've ever since been, more than willing to provide as much evidence as I can give people from both science and philosophy and their intersection for God.
How exciting. I mean, it's just so, there are actually still Christians and Catholics out there who think that religion and science are somehow opposed to each other. But if we believe that a creator is responsible for all of us, then science belongs to God. And so it must be singing his praises as we discover it more and more.
Absolutely. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. And that means the scientific description and explanation of the heavens as well. And so, there's absolutely no dichotomy between them. And you know what St. Thomas Aquinas said, the faith and reason cannot be distinct from one another. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, they have to agree because they come from the same source. And Summa contra gentila is there. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be closer to the truth.
Oh boy, I wish we could just do your whole seminar. But why don't you step us into our topic today, which is scientists who have become believers. What are some of your favorite examples?
Well, Sir Fred Hoyle is probably the most famous example, because he was the atheistic gadfly in the physics community for the longest time. He's one of the formulators of stellar nucleosynthesis and a variety of other very, very important theories. So he is an important scientist who just happened to be, as I said, the atheistic gadfly for decades in the scientific community. In fact, he was the one who renamed, the cosmic beginning. He renamed it, the Big Bang, because of course he wanted to be very sarcastic about it and so forth. But the long and short of it is, one day, this is an area called fine-tuning coincidences. His partner, William Fowler, came to him and he said, Fred, do you know what the odds, the probabilities of having an abundance of carbon by pure chance coming about in the universe? And Fred says, no. And he says, well, I've derived all the equations here for you that, pretty much assess, the resonance levels of beryllium and carbon and hydrogen and helium. And just wanted to let you know that, the odds are, some huge number. And, I think at that point, Hoyle abdicated atheism. He just, after studying the matter for about a year, he came out and wrote, in the Caltech Journal, this kind of confession. He said, I don't think that there are any blind forces worth speaking about. It seems to me that there must be some super calculating, super intellect that has monkeyed with the constants of physics and those of chemistry and biology as well. I consider this conclusion to be beyond the shadow of a doubt. He later went on with a very vivid description to say, the odds of having an abundance of carbon in our universe by pure chance are about the same as a tornado sweeping through a junkyard, assembling a Boeing 747 ready for flight. So clearly a man who has, not only changed his mind, but, a very outspoken atheism, just turned on a dime and became basically an outspoken theist. And, the whole, the relevance of the Big Bang in all of this has been, very, very important. And, a while back, Dr. Robert Jastrow, who was the founding director of, NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, basically he wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. And I think, he was personally affected, no question, by, the strength of the data at that time. And he this is a paraphrase of what he wrote in his book toward the end there. He said, that scientists have unshackled themselves from the domain of superstition and have began to climb the cliffs of scientific knowledge, arming themselves with a methodology of empirical and critical mathematical theories. And as they finally assembled and came to the final precipice of the mountain in their scaling, they pulled themselves over and found a band of theologians there awaiting them for centuries. And so it's when you look at this all goes back to 1978 or so, but then came a variety of responses. One of them was called the multiverse, which is like a big, huge mega universe that is kind of coughing out little bubble universes, trillions and trillions and trillions of bubble universes, one of which is our own. So the multiverse became very, very popular. And then after the multiverse, you have other ones that, got even more crazy. You had cyclic universes in the higher dimensional space of string theory. You had nucleating multiverses in the higher dimensional space of string theory. And, so 11 dimensions kind of generating, these things. And so it looked for a while there that, well, maybe our Big Bang wasn't the beginning of the universe, or certainly wasn't the beginning of physical reality. It may have been the beginning of our universe, but our universe is just one out of a gazillion bubble universes. So this kind of came into play for quite a long time. And then eventually the fine-tuning coincidences were so difficult to explain that people began to postulate what was called infinite multiverses with eternal inflation. So they had no beginning and they had an infinite number of bubble universes, so that anything was explicable right in this infinite multiverse. Well, it looked like, that was the end of postulating theism on the basis of science for quite some time, until the whole theory of Boltzmann brains and brief brains began to come out. You go, what's a Boltzmann brain? Well, a Boltzmann brain, it would be a brain that simply fluctuates into existence in a thermal vacuum by pure chance. And the odds of that happening, by the way, so you and I would be Boltzmann brains, right, that fluctuated in existence, but we have a memory of ourselves as being carbon-based realities in a very nice, elegant universe. And the reason the Boltzmann brain theory became very devastating to the infinite multiverse was if you did have an infinite multiverse, you'd have a virtual infinity of Boltzmann brains for every universe like ours, because our universe is so against the odds, right? So, I mean, just the low entropy of our universe, the odds of this happening by pure chance are 10 raised to the 10 raised again to the 123 to 1, which is such a huge number. It represents the same odds as a monkey typing the entire corpus of Shakespeare by random tapping of the keys in a single try. Hardly going to happen by pure chance. So that means, well, Lisa, you and I are Boltzmann brains. I mean, and everybody else around us are Boltzmann brains. And this universe is merely an illusion of our highly coordinated Boltzmann brains. And that's all there is to that. So, of course, nobody is willing to call themselves a Boltzmann brain. So, of course, the infinite multiverse suddenly became very, very suspect indeed. And then finally, of all the people, right, who actually came to the fore, Stephen Hawking, right, for a long time, certainly, open to these kinds of possibilities of anything can happen in a multiverse, especially a multiverse in string theory, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, Hawking, in his final journal paper in 2018, along with his partner, Thomas Hertog, by the way, both of them are very well-known physicists, and Hawking and Hertog showed that no infinite multiverse, which would have to be a fractal multiverse, could generate a universe like ours. And he went on to further show that any multiverse from which our universe could have come would have had to have, first of all, had a beginning. So that multiverse itself would have had a beginning. You couldn't have eternal inflation generating it. And the second thing is that not only would you have to have a finite number of bubble universes, it would have to be a very small number of bubble universes, most of which would be like our universe. Well, you can imagine once Stephen Hawking publishes a paper like that, kablamo. So, I mean, you combine that with the work of Thomas Banks, you combine that with the work of, Boltzmann brains and brief brains, Donald Page, you combine that now with Hawking and with Hertog, and the next thing you know is an infinite multiverse is an exceedingly unlikely possibility. So we're right back to where we were before. Even if you had a multiverse, it'd have to be finite in time, it'd have to have a beginning, and it would actually have to have a small number of bubble universes, which could not possibly explain 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123 to 1, right? The monkey typing Shakespeare by random tapping of the keys in a single try. So where are we now? We still need an intelligent God. Now, has this affected physicists themselves? And has this affected scientists themselves? Well, I think there's a lot of new scientific evidence out there. A lot of it is detailed by Francis Collins, who is, as you know, probably the head of the Genome Project, and is this is DNA sequencing, right, of the entire genome. So the Human Genome Project, and he is a very well-known Christian and very, much, talks about his faith from the vantage point of DNA. Now you've got a bunch of physicists that are talking about faith being substantiated by cosmological evidence in physics. And now you have these near-death experiences, and you have very good peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences that shows the strong likelihood of our consciousness surviving bodily death in the form of transphysical form that we might call a soul. So all these things are just, heading right into, a sequence, and a collective set of data. And now, if you look at the percentage of scientists, comes from a Pew survey, a recent Pew survey of the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. If you look at that survey, you will see that 51% of scientists overall are theists. They are believers in God or believers in a higher supreme power. And only 41% are either agnostics or atheists. So about 21% agnostic and 20% atheists. Well, 51% theist, 20% atheist, hardly, you can't really say at this juncture that scientists are truly atheists. They're not. They're decidedly theists. But here's the much more interesting statistic: that of that number, the young scientists who are 40 and under, according to the same Pew survey, 66% of them are theists, and 31% are either agnostic or atheists. So about 15%, somewhere in that area, respectively, for agnostics and atheists. So now you're dealing, right, among the young scientists with a 66% supermajority are theists.
Wow.
They are believers. And only about 15% are atheists. So now you have to ask yourself, well, wait a minute here. Why did that happen? The principal reason is because there is a super increase in scientific evidence for God. Like I said, these near-death experiences, the new stuff in physics, the fine-tuning coincidences, and some of these younger physicists like Luke Barnes, they're just coming out unabashedly and talking about their faith, right? He just finished writing a book called Fortunate Universe, and really, just put a hole right in the entire critique of fine-tuning coincidences. There was a book by Victor Stenger called The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning, and this guy, Luke Barnes, basically wrote a paper, a very lengthy paper, in the Australian Academy of Sciences journal, and basically saying, the fallacy of fine-tuning. So he shows, about 13 major fallacies in Victor Stenger's work to make fine-tuning a fallacy. So the new scientists are pretty much out there. And by the way, if you're looking at doctors and physicians, about 76% of doctors are not only believers in God, they're religious practitioners. 2/3 of them, of that 76%, are religious practitioners. And of that, the 76%, 73% of doctors actually believe in miracles, past and present. So in their own medical practice, 73% of doctors are obviously seeing something that they just cannot chalk up to natural causes that cannot be scientifically explained. So you put all of it together and you can be sure that there is a real change out there in the atmosphere. Scientists, doctors, and engineers are becoming now, and especially the younger ones, are becoming, the primary trendsetters for theism. So, and even religious practice in the academic community.
Boy, that is so exciting. We are going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and then we will be right back with Father Robert Spitzer. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
Okay, we are back with Father Robert Spitzer. Okay, so it's so exciting to hear that younger scientists coming up are, on the whole, really acknowledging there has to be a divine creator. There's some kind of intelligence behind all of this. So is this kind of emerging awareness changing the way we do science?
Well, it's changing several things, yes. First of all, scientism is now on the decline. And, for a while there, even just 20 years ago, scientism was still a sort of a popular thought. And scientism basically means that everything that is a truth must be explicable or at least falsifiable scientifically. Otherwise, it is suspect as truth. Now, the problem with scientism, for all philosophers, right, is, well, that's a self-refuting proposition. Because if you say all truth must be scientifically verifiable or falsifiable, the minute you put that all in there, that's a universal. Whereas every scientific fact has to be observable, which means it has to be in a particular place and time. You can never have a universal and all proposition in science. So the very proclamation of scientism, all truth must be scientifically verifiable or falsifiable, that proposition cannot be scientifically verified or falsified. So according to that proposition, it refutes itself.
I love it.
And so, of course, that's a problem. But now, I think today, even young, like I said, there's a super majority of young scientists who really believe that scientism is just not going to work because the supermajority of young scientists are believers in God. So 66% are believers in God or a higher, supreme higher power. Now, if that's the case, and you hold that, of course, scientism is out the window to begin with all those young scientists. And if scientism goes out the window, materialism goes out the window too. So the idea of trying to reduce everything to a merely materialistic explanation, to a merely physical explanation. Now, materialism in physics has been out, the door for quite some time. Quantum physics has always been a step beyond, certainly, what we call classical physics, classical physical materialism. So already, there's implications that there has to be something mentative out there, besides, the material, besides, classical physical processes. So we've known that for quite a while. But now, as I said, the real genie is out of the bottle. And, now it's going to be hard to get that genie back in. And, the materialism bottle and the scientism bottle is pretty much over. So that's been a real first hit to two aberrant views of science, where, science was pushed to the extreme of scientism, or pushed to the extreme of what we call physical reductionism or materialism. So those two movements are pretty much gone. And we don't hear, of course, there's always some people who want to go back to them. But among the young scientists, that's a very rare kind of thing. Some of the old cadre still go back to their materialism, but most do not in the young group. The second thing that's kind of interesting is that now I think a lot of young scientists also will admit that science can't possibly talk about things like conscience, good, moral propositions. It certainly can't talk about spiritual, truths or even transcendent truths, because they're beyond science, right? That God is beyond science. And most scientists will admit that because, after all, science has to be grounded in observation, and observations must be grounded in this universe, which is what we call the observable universe. And if that's the case, then all scientific evidence has to come from within the universe. Well, God, by definition, is outside the universe, beyond the universe. And so how can you disprove God, right, who's outside the universe, with evidence that's used only from within our universe? Well, that's just like trying to disprove, the cartoon characters are assembling all the data in the cartoon to disprove the cartoonist. Won't work. So, I mean, it's just, impossible to do. All that being said, then, a lot of scientists are saying, I'm not going to try and describe love in a merely scientific physical process way. There's lots of philosophers and scientists who are already saying, evolution alone cannot explain, the emergence of human beings. There's just not nearly enough time to do that. And so, even people who are ostensibly, atheistic, like Thomas Nagel, right, who basically says, look, I'd like to be an agnostic or an atheist, but I can tell you this right now. Materialistic neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory is almost certainly wrong. That's the name of his book, right? And when you have Nagel even saying that, and just saying you're going to need something more than physical processes, you're going to need something more than emergent probabilities in a merely materialistic evolutionary schema. You're going to need something more. Well, what? Well, something mind-like. Well, what's that? Well, something mind-like. Of course, nobody wants to say, maybe transcendent mind-like, maybe God, right? If you're an atheist, you don't want to admit to that right off the bat. But let me tell you this right now. If most scientists are theists, which they are, and most young scientists, supermajority of them, are theistic, believers in God, which they are, then for all intents and purposes, most scientists are not merely, neo-Darwinian materialistic evolutionists. They are evolutionists who make some room for some transcendent, guiding, intelligent principle. Now, if you kind of cull the spectrum of atheists and so forth, of theistic scientists, you have some who are maybe what are called nomogenesis fans, and some of them that are orthogenesis fans, and so forth. Like you take Francis Collins, right? That was the head of the Genome Project. He's a person, he certainly believes in God, and he certainly believes in evolution all at the same time. But he is basically nomogenesis, right? He believes that God, this intelligent designer, front-loaded into the Big Bang all of the classical and quantum mechanical dimensions of not only physics but also chemistry and biology. So that would be a scientist, for example, who is nomogenesis. Orthogenesis means that God is like a final cause. That means that God is like like an omega point that is sort of drawing all of creation. So he's given order to creation, at the beginning there, but he's drawing it to completion as a final cause and allowing emergent probability to have its way. But at the end of the day, he is ordering it toward an evolutionary gain over an anthropic gain, an entropic gain, which it would be a downward, disorderly trend. So entropy versus evolution, right? God is making evolution, which is really against the odds sort of win on a continuous basis. A lot of guys who are orthogenesis people, of course, one of the famous Catholics was a Jesuit by the name of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was definitely postulated a final cause like an omega point, which was guiding the evolutionary process in this continuously upward ascending evolutionary way. Then you have people who are both nomo and orthogenesis people. That would be, for example, Michael Polanyi, a very world famous chemist, but also a philosopher who basically believes that, yes, God front loaded everything there in the universe, including the laws of biology and the laws of chemistry, which would govern the laws of physics in an assembly program would guide it. And so a guy like Polanyi would be both nomo and orthogenesis, brilliant guy. He wrote, this famous article called "The Irreducibility of Life." It's a very short article, but it really had a huge influence on, I think, young scientists. So you can see, that's probably the majority of scientists for sure are, what I would call, believers in God, who have, also believe in evolution, but they put the two together in one of those three major schools of thought, generally. There are some people who still believe in, that God not only front loaded it, but, he created all species at once. But most people do not believe that God created all species at the beginning, of life on Earth. That would be that would be like 3.9 billion years ago would be when life, like we call it microorganisms. These would be in the order of protozoa or flagella or something of that nature, or perhaps even simpler single-celled organisms. They probably started emerging about 3.9 billion years ago on Earth, Earth being 4.6 billion years old. So, I mean, if you take all this seriously, you can see that scientists are taking God very seriously. Of course, they take evolution seriously, but Catholics are allowed to believe in evolution. And they have been since the time of Pope Pius XII, who wrote Humani Generis. I believe it was 1951. He wrote that encyclical, which gave Catholics a huge degree of latitude to believe in evolution in the Bible. So long as it was scientific and so long as Catholics did not deny the reality of a transcendent soul that was uniquely made for each human being by God, so long as you affirm that, and that's not a hard thing to affirm anymore. I mean, it's a very easy thing to affirm. So, because there's so much evidence, not only, as I said, from near-death experiences, but other things. You put all these things together, and young scientists are beginning to, as you can see, they are beginning to get a very good sense and feel of how the transcendent and the immanent, the physics and the transphysical, our metaphysical come together, in this beautiful design universe. It's not just that the universe proclaims the glory of God, the heavens proclaim the glory of God, but the scientific explanation of the universe and heavens proclaims the glory of God. And so, yes, that's beginning to emerge, and and is that really strange in science? Yes, because it's a whole new way of looking at science that's open in many ways to transcendent evolutionary processes. That's coming out more and more today. Was certainly less so in the past. But let's face it, the majority of famous physicists have been theists. I mean, James Clerk Maxwell, in electrodynamics and electrical field theory originally. I mean, Albert Einstein, Max Planck, who was the founder of quantum theory. And you combine Einstein's relativity with Planck's quantum theory, and then Werner Heisenberg, clearly the indeterminacy theory, the blending indeterminately of quantum and general relativistic theories and field equations. So you put all those things together. Werner Heisenberg was clearly a theist as well. Kurt Gödel was clearly a theist. Sir Arthur Eddington, another one of the big areas of stellar nucleosynthesis, one of the founders there. Sir Arthur Eddington, in his book, The Nature of the Physical World, basically winds up a chapter called A Defense of Mysticism with this quote. I mean, this is one of the top-notch physicists in the world. He says, there are things in this universe untrammeled by the domain of physics. Not only the things of spirit and art, but even science itself. Science can scarcely challenge, the warrant for something beyond itself, for the very anticipation of scientific answers and the very intelligibility of the universe in terms of mathematics. All of these things are really beyond the domain of physics itself. And then he goes on to say that the light beckons ahead and the purpose surging within our nature responds. So again, that's clearly a very theistic, almost mystical response and interpretation of science. And so you look at, this, even Galileo Galilei. I mean, of course, he was, right in the middle of the whole controversy, but unquestionably a theist. Sir Isaac Newton, the founder of classical physics, spent most of his life trying to do theology as well as physics. So, this idea, that science and faith are separate. I mean, this is, in the dreams, I guess, of Dawkins or somebody like that, but it's not in the real world. And by the way, even Dawkins himself has recently said, well, I'm not so much of an atheist. I'm an agnostic who leans in the direction of atheism. Well, I mean, why is he saying that? Because the evidence is shifting ground as he's standing on it. And so it's all of these things that are, really coming together that, they make for a very different scientific environment. Now, again, ethics is basically, you can try and derive some ethical principles from science, but when you move from, the universe or ecology as a science, and you should respect the earth and respect, nature, et cetera, to, something that's an ethical statement like that, that's beyond science. It really is. You're going to have to turn to your conscience. You're going to have to turn to a whole other domain called moral theory. Yes, there are intersections between science and morals, but you can't derive morals from science. You just can't do it. Morals are on a different plane. Morals are present to us in our conscience. Morals are present to us through divine revelation, which comes to it. And, there's a whole science of theology of divine revelation, and, where God has certainly not been absent, but reveals himself. And let's face facts. If 73% of the medical community believes in miracles past and present, and much of that belief is grounded in the fact that they've experienced something like a miracle, even in their own practice, something which is scientifically inexplicable, there's got to be openness. To ethics, openness to a morality beyond mere physicalism and mere, materialism that is coming out. And that, yes, it is changing. And so the I think there, again, in the scientific community, there's not just more openness to God, but more openness to a God who reveals himself. And in that revelation, of course, moral theology. So that's, another, dimension of it.
All right. Father, we just have a couple of minutes to wrap up here. I want to mention to everybody, Sophia Institute has, fathers, The Catholic Faith and Science. It is a faculty manual, but it has lesson plans for regular teachers that can absolutely be adapted for your homeschool. In 2023 and 2024, our Sunday visitors coming out with various study Bibles that have that intersection of faith and science. So be looking for those. And please do check out the Magis Center and look at, maybe you can get some of these from the library, but order them from the Magis Center if you'd like to own them and pass them around your homeschool. There are DVDs and all sorts of resources, and I believe streaming service as well, right, Father, at the Magis Center? So much good stuff. CredibleCatholic.com.
And just click on the 7 essential modules. It's all free. Show that to your teenagers, and I'll tell you, it will change their faith. And when they go to college, they will be, give them a shot, a vaccine against, the atheism that they're going to encounter, mostly in the humanities, not in the sciences, certainly not in engineering, but mostly in the humanities.
Wow. Wow. Okay, Father, just as a wrap up, what else is kind of out there in that you'd like to just share with us before we go? What thought would you like to leave us with?
Well, that Sophia Institute, course, it's really a senior year course, but it has a student textbook too that is just worth buying. I mean, you could go to Sophia Institute, just click on the book there.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the show notes too, Father.
And that book, I think, is just worth buying and letting. It's written for a high school audience, and especially a homeschool audience. Students, they can read that book, and I think it would be really eye-opening and helping them to defend their faith, especially when they get outside of the parental structures and maybe under the influence of some secular, programs in a university, even especially a Catholic, not a Catholic, but a public university, which might have a great deal of pressure, to bend their way toward deconstruction or something of that nature.
Well, it has just been a joy having you with us, Father. I wish we could have done like a 10-part series. This is so rich. But at least now, if people are not already aware of the Magis Center, they are now. And I'd love to just have more and more homeschoolers availing themselves of your resources. Thank you for all that you do to just use science and theology and philosophy and everything that's available to us to just show how great our God truly is and how really undeniably present he is in his creation. It's such a beautiful mission, Father.
It's an honor. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you for being with us. I'll have as many of those resources as I can in the show notes, and feel free to write to me, Lisa, at wonderfullymade139.com if you have any further questions about the resources in this episode. Don't want you to have to go crazy taking notes. But everyone, God bless you and have a beautiful day. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.